Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this installment of the PENC webinar series. My name is Katie Cox and I am the PENC Membership Director. I will be serving as moderator for today's presentation. If you have any technical difficulties, please use the chat box and I will try to assist you. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation today. However, if you do have an urgent question that you would like to have addressed, you can go ahead and type that question in. Today's presenter is Brian Ceccarelli. Brian is a licensed professional engineer in the state of North Carolina. Mr. Ceccarelli has a degree in physics from the University of Arizona. As principal software engineer for Talis Software PLLC, Mr. Ceccarelli has developed computer-aided mining applications, CAD/CAM applications, biomedical applications, and space exploration applications for Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Ceccarelli became interested in traffic engineering when the town of Cary, North Carolina bestowed upon him a red light camera ticket. Since then, Mr. Ceccarelli has been published in Traffic Technology International and has been an expert panelist in traffic signal timing for the Institute of Transportation Engineers. He has presented for the North Carolina Society of Engineers, the American Society of Civil Engineers, the National Society of Professional Engineers, and for the United Kingdom International Press's Autonomous Vehicle Symposiums in Europe and America. Ceccarelli is an expert witness in traffic signal timing and red light cameras in several states. Thank you for being here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian, and my presentation today is about physics, engineering practice, and jurisprudence. And I aim to tell you how these three things tie together. Little backstory. 10 years ago, it all started for me when I got that red light camera ticket in the town of Cary. And when that camera flashed behind my head, the first thing that went through my head was, man, this yellow light does not conform to Newton's second law of motion. And I knew that there was a physics problem right off the bat. And what as a citizen, a naive citizen, and I approached the DOT in the town of Cary about this physics problem, in the formula that the DOT uses to say yellow lights, and they just kind of thought I was a wacko. And just to let you know, nobody has ever criticized the math and physics that I have presented in the last two webinars. They just blow it off. But so I have sought an engineering remedy for 10 years now, even on the bequest of the North Carolina board, to get down to the bottom of all this and to see what's going on. The Board of Engineers gave me an informal quest in about 2015 that said, Brian, go change the federal guidelines. And so I've been trying to do that, and now this is 2019, and I finally, over the last few months, with the help of several lawyers and other engineers and physicists, finally came to the conclusion that you're going to see in this webinar. If I were you, I would do a screenshot of this title page while you can, because you probably want to refer back to it. I post this PowerPoint on my own website here. There's the address of it. And away we go. So in this webinar, I plan on covering the topic of jurisprudence, which is the principles of law, the historical ones, and how the red light cameras and yellow light durations fit into the history and the principles of law. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about modern manifestations of these principles of law and how they make it into our state statutes. We'll move on, which is a great transition to engineering practice. Every state has a set of statutes called their own Engineering Practice Act, which requires engineers to have a license and to certify their engineering works. Mandates engineers to only practice within their area of competence. And then because I know that there's some attorneys listening in on all this, I'm going to list a few common mistakes made by legislators, judges, and attorneys, which are unfamiliar with engineering practice law. I've been in several court litigation cases regarding a lot of these things, and the same mistakes that attorneys make. They make case after case. They play like a broken record. And so then I'm going to tie engineering practice law into physics. And I'm going to state that the ITE yellow change and all red clearance intervals practice is not an engineering practice. By the time we get to this point, you're going to see exactly why. We'll move on to, is physics binding in court? Funny question. One would think it would be, but it's not entirely obvious, especially some of the things I've been through, which I will tell you about, very amusing stories. And then we'll have a review of the misapplications of the physics and math by ITE, stuff that I covered in the first 2 webinars. And then I'll mention something about the guilty. Who's guilty in all this? And we'll close right there. So it all starts with a concept in jurisprudence 1,000 years ago. So this story is so applicable to red light cameras and yellow light durations, it's scary. So 1,000 years ago, exactly almost to the day, King Canute was a famous Viking king. He's a king of England. For several years, he's a very powerful one. And I'll just tell you this story as recorded by Henry of Huntingdon in the 12th century. Many of you may remember your history lesson that King Canute was the guy who issued a decree to halt the tides. And there's a little backstory to him trying to do this. And there's a lot of, every day in his court, land barons would come in and different people would come into his court and ask King Canute to grant them favors. I want this, give me that, you should do this, King Canute, for me. Well, he got so fed up with all this, a steady procession of people asking him for favors and praising him because he's king and that the king can do anything, that one day he took his throne and I'll just read it. Canute set his throne by the seashore and commanded the incoming tide to halt and not wet his feet in robes. Yet continuing to rise as usual, the tide dashed over his feet and legs without respect to his royal person. Then the king leapt backwards, saying, "Let all men know how empty and worthless is the power of kings, for there is none worthy of the name but he whom heaven, earth, and sea obey by eternal laws." He then hung his gold crown on a crucifix and never wore it again, to the honor of God, the Almighty King. The point being is that though he's king, the supreme legislator of the land, he can't enforce a law which conflicts with the laws of nature. He can't raise his hands like you see him doing there and command the tides to halt. The moon's gravity is going to bring those tides in no matter what. There's nothing he can do about it. And so he knows that his decree is futile and stupid, but he did it to prove a point that no legislator can pass a law that conflicts with the laws of nature. This ties into the red light, this ties into the yellow light duration problem very well, because the practice of setting yellow light durations conflicts with the laws of nature, and government, those laws of nature being the laws of physics, actually the same law that the yellow light durations disobey is the same sort of thing that King Canute's doing here. They're both trying to buck Newton's second law of motion, F equals ma. Now, the person who introduced me to King Canute was Paul Stam. He's an attorney here in North Carolina who I went to once I discovered this physics problem and the problem with the North Carolina DOT's standard. And if you have a problem with the law and nobody's listening, the engineers don't want to do anything about it, you go to your state representative. So I went to him. He was my state representative. His father is a chemist, so he had a good deal of respect for science, and he has a wonderful understanding of the history of law and the concepts. Paul Stam was also the General Assembly Speaker pro tem for several years. Paul Stam is also handling the current litigation against the city of Greenville for all the things you're about to hear. Another big man in the name of jurisprudence is a guy named Marcus Cicero. He was 1,000 years before King Canute. And he is one of the fathers of Western law. And one of his most famous philosophies of law is right reason. I learned right reason back in high school days. And if there's laws just don't come out of nowhere, his idea was that laws only come from reason. If there's a reason for something to have a law, then you make the law. The laws come from right reason. And right reason has to be in agreement with nature. You can't pass a law, you can't have any law that disagrees with nature. So, and these sort of laws of nature, the next yellow highlight here is that we cannot be freed from its obligations by Senate or people, and we need not look outside ourselves for an expounder or interpreter of it. There will not be different laws in Rome and in Athens. These laws of nature apply everywhere, no matter where you are. You don't need an expounder or interpreter of it. Nobody needs to hire a physicist to expound on physics because it's a natural law of nature. Anybody can learn physics. It's there for anybody to see. You don't have to be a licensed professional engineer to expound on physics. Anybody can because it's out there. It's free. It's a law of nature. Engineers don't hold the keys of the kingdom to the laws of physics. You'd be surprised how many times that particular topic came up in depositions for my expert witnesses. The town of Cary's lawyer kept on asking my physicist friends, "Are you a licensed professional engineer?" As if that makes a difference whether you know the laws of physics or not. So Cicero. But by the way, Paul Stam brought up both Cicero and King Canute in hearings, and they speak volumes. If you know Cicero and you know the tale of King Canute, they speaks volumes, but most of the time these stories fall on deaf ears. The judge doesn't know Canute or doesn't know Cicero, but it is interesting. So engineering malpractice looks like this. The red light camera industry looks like this. If an iceberg of malfeasance out there, a common citizen comes into this problem, he gets a red light camera ticket and photo enforcement, and the first thing he usually comes across is this bribery thing, like there's red light cameras, companies are being bribed like Redflex, we're bribing people to keep their cameras, and this happens a lot. There's other laws being made corrupt, like in the photo enforcement industry. It turns the concept of you're innocent until proven guilty into you're innocent only if you blame somebody else. There's this corruption of man-made laws going on there. Process laws, it's constitutional, it's not constitutional, is due process correct, not correct, is this criminal or a civil case? And the laws that the red light cameras companies actually package and introduce to state legislatures corrupt these existing laws subtly but effectively. What the common citizen doesn't see is this big iceberg down here underneath the waters, the engineering malpractice which feeds everything above. If it wasn't for this down here, there wouldn't be a red light camera industry. And I'm gonna tie all this stuff together with a bow in this webinar. Now, if you're interested in the problems with the photo enforcement industry with regards to the United States Constitution, Professor Adam McLeod of Faulkner University has the definitive article on this one. It's a beautiful thing. And you'll find it in the public discourse. It's an online magazine. I can't exactly remember who publishes it, but it's a beautiful treatise on the subject, civil versus criminal law, and everything that's turned upside down in photo enforcement. This, and the next one, as Don Mankiewicz, he's a screenwriter and novelist who wrote an episode of Star Trek, the original series, called Court Martial, on February 2nd, 1967, which beautifully explains how the red light camera industry works. In that episode, Captain Kirk is accused of killing a guy named Charles Finney, but it's the ship's logs, the cameras on the bridge are recording Captain Kirk's doings and sayings, and it looks like Captain Kirk is guilty of killing Charles Finney. But really what has happened is that Charles Finney had reprogrammed the ship's computer to make it look like Captain Kirk is guilty. So behind the scenes, somebody is programming the computer, which is framing Captain Kirk. This is a beautiful representation of what the red light camera industry is about. The cameras are there, they're photographing drivers entering the intersection after the light turned red, but it's actually the traffic engineer misprogramming the traffic signal who is making the drivers run the red light. It looks like the drivers are guilty. That's what the cameras are for, to make the drivers look guilty, but really underneath the covers, the traffic signal has been misprogrammed. The computers, one of the points the episode makes, that the computer is seemingly infallible. It's an infallible piece of machinery. It's just been programmed wrong. So there's kind of two pieces to this. There's engineering practice, and we'll talk about the law with regards to licensure and seals. Licensure, we get a license to indicate our competency. It doesn't guarantee our competency, but it just indicates we were competent at one time, or we're competent about some sort of whatever on the test. And every time we do an engineering work, we professional engineers will put our seal on it and sign it and date it. And that is to guarantee accountability to the public. This is our mandate in North Carolina laws: in order to safeguard life, health, and property and to promote the public welfare. The practice of engineering and the practice of land surveying in the state are hereby declared to be subject to regulation in the public interest. Okay, that's the purpose of engineering practice law. And there's provisions and which you need to be duly licensed. Okay. The right to engage in the practice of engineering or land surveying is a personal right based on the qualifications of a person, as evidenced by the person's certificate of licensure. And then any work we do to make sure that we're accountable to the public is that our final drawings and specification plans and reports, when issued, will be certified and stamped with a seal or facsimile of the seal, so forth and so on. This is so that if something happens wrong with the operation of our designs, the implementation of our designs, the public can hold us accountable. We're accountable to all these, our own work. We're answerable to the public. And so when we put our stamp of approval on an engineering work, we back it up with our license and our career, saying that we guarantee it personally. Licensure is all about personal accountability. Now, the first thing I'm going to show you is that there's two parts of the engineering of all this. Now, you haven't seen what's coming up next. Not only, I've been talking about yellow light durations for the last two webinars, but there's also red light camera, speed camera installation plans that are also engineering works. And you're going to see something that's probably going to surprise all of you. Here's one, a red light camera system for Miller Place in Suffolk County, New York. And if you see something wrong with this, I'll give you 10 seconds to look it over. What is wrong with this? Give it a good look. Okay, there is no seal, signature date of a licensed professional engineer on this. The question is this an engineering work or not? Red light camera installation plans look like there's about 10 pages. Usually the first page is a survey map of the intersection. It tells you where to put the cameras, the dimensions, where to put the cameras. This is supposed to be stamped by a licensed surveyor, but it's not. Same plan has some structures, some foundation structures. Here's the camera, here's the pole, the foundation. Okay, this is a structure, there's no stamp or certification of a licensed professional engineer on this either. Here's a third page. This is like 3 pages out of 10. Now those traffic engineers out there are going to see that these are advanced warning signs, and the MUTCD requires as a standard that advanced warning signs be placed as an engineering study, as a result of an engineering study. So formally, in the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which is a federal document which states adopt as law, these signs can only be there by an engineering study, yet there's no engineer who sealed his plan. When confronted about this, the camera companies and the traffic engineers who direct their red light camera programs and the city council will defend their red light programs with these 2 statements. These statements play like a broken record. I mean, every city, Suffolk County, Wilmington, North Carolina, Fayetteville, Greenville, they all say the same. Oh, they're just cameras on a stick. And the operation of the camera is independent from its installation plans. And the camera, let's proceed. That was Xerox, is a red light camera company. This is American Traffic Solutions, now known as Vera Mobility. And you see a seal here, but you don't see a signature or a date. Okay. Nassau County's American Traffic Solutions, seal date. This seal, actually, let's see if I can blow it up there. You can't read it that well. It's signed by a man. Well, it's the seal of a man named Robert Zaytouni. Robert Zaytouni gets around the red light camera plans for ATS. He's licensed to practice engineering in 4 or 5 states. ATS simply uses his seal and copies it on these plans. Zaytouni had nothing to do with supervising the work done here. He wasn't in responsible charge. They just have his JPEG of a seal on file and smack it on these plans. There's no signature, no date. Same plans up in Nassau County. Seal, no signature. City of New Orleans is also an American Traffic Solutions client. And the engineer record, Zaytouni, shows up again. Okay. Here's a map where these things are going to be. Here's some more detail. No seal or anything here. Not even, let alone a signature and a this problem is this omission of a valid seal is not just limited to red light cameras, but also speed cameras. So speed cameras have the same sort of plans. They're about 10 pages long, the same sort of intersection and street maps and surveys maps. None of them are certified by a licensed professional engineer. What we found in New Orleans is that when we asked New Orleans for their certified plans, it turns out that the city did not even possess them. They did not possess them. They did not possess their own photo enforcement engineering plans. They did not have it. American Traffic Solutions had them in Phoenix. They had to request ATS to send them these plans. ATS is the custodian of the plans. New Orleans doesn't even know what's going on. When I told the Board of Engineers in Louisiana about this, the investigator was like angry. He was so mad because what has happened is that how can you construct engineering works? What company, what contractor is going to install this stuff if they're not signed and sealed by a licensed professional engineer? Well, ATS gets around that by creating its own contracting company in Louisiana, and then it gives all the work to its own contracting company. And the words of the investigator in Louisiana was like, man, that company has a lot of chutzpah. That case is still going on in Louisiana. It's case 2019-1. Now, look at Zaytouni. We're going to move to Wilmington, North Carolina. You're going to get the impression that these uncertified plans is not the exception, it's the rule in this industry. Here's Wilmington, North Carolina. Take a look at the engineer of record, Zaytouni. Well, guess what? Zaytouni has never been licensed in the state of North Carolina, ever. Again, ATS simply has these templates they're using to create these plans, and they forgot to erase Zaytouni's name from the title, from these sheets, from these drawings. But they remembered in this one to remove it. By the way, this sign you'll see appearing in a lot of red light camera intersections. This sign violates the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. It's not a legitimate regulation sign. It's not, and in the North Carolina, the law says you must have advanced warning signs, which are usually diagonal signs painted red or yellow, not these regulatory signs. So every intersection in Wilmington was installed illegally because he never got the advanced, even just the sign is wrong, not to mention the lack of engineering seal. And North Carolina also requires the company who is drawing up these plans be licensed in the state of North Carolina. ATS is not licensed here. Here's a plan from Greenville, North Carolina. There's a lawsuit going on against Greenville, North Carolina. When the litigation began before Greenville installed its first red light camera, and so we sued them before it began. And so when we asked for the plans, the red light camera plans, even back then, we asked for the signed and sealed. Well, it turns out that ATS wouldn't give Greenville the signed and sealed plans, but 6 months later, we got these sort of plans with this sort of seal on it, which turns out to be illegitimate. One, you can't read the signature, but it also turns out that that this guy, the Board of Engineers did the research on this. The man who actually sealed this did not supervise any of this work. He got reprimanded, $5,000 fine, a mandate to take a remedial professional ethics class, and if he doesn't pass it, he gets his license revoked. ATS is trying to find a way to legitimize its illegitimate plans. An engineer cannot sign and seal a plan after the fact. You can't do that. Here's a fun one. 1 year later, after ATS is notified by the Board of Engineers it's practicing without a license, putting invalid certifications, American Traffic Solutions does a plan for Salinas, California. Now, ATS is well aware that it needs certified plans, so there's this certification mark. Nope, there's no date on this, and the seal has got the wrong number on it. This seal, by the way, is on, and the signature is on 4 pages of the Salinas red light camera plans, but it's the exact copy. Each page is an exact, each seal is an exact copy of the other. The signatures are identical, exact copies. There's something fishy going on here, obviously, and the California Board of Engineers is now taking action on this. What you're seeing is deliberate acts of breaking engineering practice acts by the red light camera companies. Redflex in Denver, Colorado is no different. Here's uncertified plans. And in Denver by Redflex, who's not licensed to practice engineering in Colorado. Now, when you ask some cities to hand over their red light camera installation plans, they simply say, no, we're not going to give them to you. For instance, in Fayetteville, North Carolina, Fayetteville responded to the FOIL request and said, ATS said, no, this is proprietary information listed with regards to our setup. They're not going to give they're not going to give their red light camera installation plans, even though they're owned by the public on the public right of way to the public. By this time, ATS is wising up. And so they're just putting a clamp down and giving its red light camera installation plans to anybody. Some even go further than that, like a friend of mine asked for some red light camera and speed camera plans in New York City under this FOIL request. And they respond, this is the response, has closed your FOIL request, blah, blah, blah. Your request under the Freedom of Information Law is denied because the records you requested are exempt from disclosure under this section. Well, the law says each section shall, in accordance with its published rules, make available for public inspection and copying all records, except that such agency may deny access to records or portions thereof that are compiled for law enforcement purposes and which, if disclosed, would interfere with law enforcement investigations or judicial proceedings. Now, that means that the NYC DOT does not want to hand over the plans because somehow this is going to interfere with their law enforcement. My guess is that there's not a single red light or speed light camera in New York City that's been operating legally ever. That's billions of dollars worth of fraud, billions of engineering fraud there. They will not do it. This sort of attitude is common among city councils who are trying to defend their photo enforcement program, getting all the money they can. They believe it's okay to break the law in order to enforce the law. I'll say that again. This happened in the city of Raleigh years before this. It's okay not to tell the people getting these tickets that all they have to do is sign an affidavit saying they were not driving at the time and location of the citation. If we actually tell them the law, they won't pay their tickets. They feel it's okay, justify to break the law in order to enforce the law. Now, here's just to make sure so that you know I'm not kidding about the Board of Engineers taking this seriously. Here's a judgment against American Traffic Solutions by the North Carolina Board of Engineers. Here's the judgment of the North Carolina Board of Engineers against the guy who illegally certified the Greenville plans, reprimand. I blacked out the name because you guys don't need to know, but it is interesting. Here's Redflex in Colorado, a cease and desist against Redflex there. Now that's a lot to swallow. All this stuff seems to be the rule in the red light camera industry. All these plans are indeed engineering works. and surveying works, but none are certified by a licensed engineer. There are cases in some cities like Raleigh. Raleigh uses Xerox, for instance, and there are sealed red light camera installation plans, but Raleigh redacts the seal so that the public can't read it, which is also illegal in North Carolina. All I know is that in the past, all these companies know that they must seal the plans because there are examples from all these companies of sealed plans at one point. They just stopped doing it like a decade ago. Now, we're going to transition now to like yellow lights. How's the yellow light stuff work into all this? This is a lawyer in New Suffolk County, New York. He and I work together on a lot of the issues of Suffolk County. Suffolk County is a plethora of engineering problems. Every time you turn around, there's some other problem. I showed you Xerox plans, for instance, that are not signed and sealed by a licensed professional engineer, but it doesn't stop there. The traffic signal plans are not signed by a licensed professional engineer either. And any of the traffic signal timing sheets are not either. There's nothing, and the laws are not any different than in New York than in North Carolina or Colorado or California. It's all the same. And so there's some real crazy stuff going on in New York. Now, concerning the yellow lights, this statement here, it took literally David and I, several other lawyers, 10 years to boil it down. It all boils down to this. The standard of care that traffic engineers use to time the yellow light departs from the standard of care under engineering practice law. The standard of care is an ITE practice of setting the yellow light durations, but that does not meet the requirements of engineering practice law. It all has to do with how does physics, there's problems in the physics with the ITE practice, how does this connect to engineering practice law? Are the laws of physics binding in a court of law? Here's Judge Ridgway, and he's the one that judged the case, my case against the town of Cary. The answer is yes, through engineering practice law. So these cities have, states have the definition of engineering practice, which is in the state, any service or creative work, the adequate performance, which requires the application of the special knowledge of the mathematical, physical, and engineering sciences. Physical sciences, one of them is physics. California, New York, Texas, Webster's Dictionary, every state has such a law or guideline that says this. So physics is binding through engineering practice law. Most states adopt the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. That's how you're, it's an engineering document that tells the standards and the guidelines for how you set your yellow lights, among many things. And as a standard, which means all engineers must obey this one, the duration of the yellow change interval shall be determined using engineering practices. Defined by state law, application of physics. Not misapplications of physics, applications of physics. Same thing goes for all red clearance intervals. Now, there are several, in a court of law, many times the defendants, the traffic engineers and the lawyers trying to defend their program will bring up things like, we're just using the ITE, yellow change interval formula, because the MUTCD says so. But in the MUTCD is a special document called a Systems Requirements Specification. Engineers know what these are, and it has the vocabulary specific to engineers. The engineer is only required to implement standards. Anything like support and guidance statements, like this one here, that the yellow change interval should be a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 6, is guidance only. Any statements that are like that, engineers use at his own discretion. They're not required because they do not always apply. If they always apply, they would be standards. Now, even standards are written by fallible humans, so if you got a bad standard, it's the duty of the engineer to change it. To drill a point home, even case law says that you can use basic physics calculations, the court is supposed to recognize basic physics, speed and distance calculations, scientific facts. It's not just engineering practice, the definition of that kicks in. It's also case laws in North Carolina. So I'm going to make this wild statement, which is going to make mad every traffic engineer that's looking at this slide. The ITE yellow light practice is not an engineering practice. My last two webinars went over this. I described the physics, and then I described the misapplications of physics. I tell you how you can go get these last two webinars here. It's not an engineering practice because it is misapplications of physics, and the practice does harm the public, as I showed you in the last couple of webinars. The practice is not in agreement with nature. This is a jurisprudence principle. King Canute would not like the ITE practice. A little review of the ITE practice is this formula here. If you want to fix all the red light camera problems, get rid of the red light camera industry and reduce all the crashes by 90%, all you do is remove this 2 here. Without the 2, it actually abides by the laws of physics. With the 2, it doesn't. There are other problems here. This recalculated red interval literally puts conflicting traffic in the intersection at the same time, literally programmed to harm people. They do it because it's operationally more efficient for the intersection if they put some cars in the intersection at the same time. They assume that conflicting traffic that gets the right of way is just going to notice these later entering vehicles. Here's the 4 physics problems with the yellow light. I'm not going to go over them again, but there they are. You can go back to webinar 2 and read all about it. In my opinion, this is what I put on my my affidavits. It is my opinion that the ITE yellow change interval practice each year inevitably causes hundreds of thousands of drivers to run red lights, receive citations, and crash, despite drivers taking all reasonable steps to conform to the law and to keep themselves and others safe. Now, as my lawyers like me to put, it is my opinion that. The physicist in me wants just to leave out these words and say, the yellow change interval practice each year inevitably causes, stated as a fact. And because of the last 2 webinars, and the physics says exactly that, and all the statistics back up the physics. Literally, the ITE formula causes 90% of those who run red lights to run red lights because of the bad physics. Now, about the ITE formula, most DOTs, if not all, use the ITE yellow change interval practice and put that into their DOT specs or even Virginia state law. But note, the ITE practice is not a federal standard. The ITE practice is not a federal guideline. ITE puts a disclaimer on its practice. If you open up any of the ITE publications, like the traffic engineering handbooks, on the very first pages, we disclaim everything. We don't guarantee anything. And guess what? Not once do they ever call the yellow change interval an engineering practice. It's just a practice without the adjective. ITE does not recommend its own practice. The ITE yellow change interval formula they don't even recommend it. It's not an official recommended practice even within ITE. ITE is trying to make it one, and I'm on that panel discussion regarding the new intended recommended practice regarding this now. And I can tell you right now that ITE denies that its practice has any authority, and that the ITE does not want to take any action to fix this formula, none. They've been using it for 50 years. They believe that because they've always been using it this way, it's right from now on. We're not going to go back to square one and get the physics right. How can they get away with this? ITE is not licensed to practice engineering in any state. ITE offers engineering services, but does not certify its work. So without licensure and without signing and sealing work, there's no responsibility, there's no accountability. Traffic engineers just pick up the ITE practice because it's there. They don't know any better. That's just how it is. There's nothing else. So physics, these formulas, these are physics. A licensee shall perform services only in areas of the licensee's competence. Well, the formula is not traffic engineering specific, it's physics. The licensee should be competent in physics before actually doing anything with the yellow change interval formula. So when a licensed professional engineer uses the ITE formula, he's actually using something outside his level of competence. He uses it, but he doesn't know what it means, which is bad. To show you that the traffic engineers do not know what physics even is, here's a deposition from one of the town of Cary's expert traffic engineers. I didn't mention her name, but we asked her about it's all about Newton's second law of motion, F equals ma. Paul Stam asks her, do you know about F equals ma? And she said, I've heard of that equation, and that's pure physics, yes. And is that something you would apply to traffic engineering because you're talking about force, mass, and acceleration? And she says, as a very limited vacuum world, yes. I keep on chuckling every time physics applies to everything. It's not limited, especially not to a world that's been cleaned or not cleaned. I just chuckle every time I read that. And then he asks her, do you recall in North Carolina, ITE got together as a separate organization and gave the NCDOT, solicited the NCDOT to write the NCDOT the yellow light spec. Do you call the meetings of the task force, the NCITE task force, or any subcommittee that you were on, any discussion about whether the physics of the formula actually fit the engineering? Hardcore physics, she says, like what you're talking about, yes. Answer, no. There was no discussion about that I'm aware of. No one even touches the physics of this formula. One of my expert witnesses was Dr. Elizabeth George. She's the chairman of the physics department at Wittenberg University in Ohio. And the town of Cary is asking her what the definition of physics is. And she goes, well, the question is, and why would engineering students be required to take a course in physics? Well, actually, Paul Stam asked the question. Elizabeth says, since engineers is based on the way nature works and the laws and the models for how nature works, the engineers need to understand those at a basic level in order to apply them in the real world. Physics, real world. The town of Cary's lawyer says, move to strike. She's moving to strike the laws of physics. It is, there's a video deposition of this, and you should see Dr. Elizabeth George's face when Miss Martineau said objection, move to strike. It's like, what universe are you from? Is engineering the application of physics and other sciences? Yes. All right, kind of says it all there. Now, we're almost getting ready to close. And at the PENC website, I listed a bunch of questions about who the guilty are. And I will just read the questions as I wrote them on the PENC website, and I'll answer them. See, given a class action lawsuit against the town of Cary, North Carolina, Cary motioned to strike the laws of physics. Can the town of Cary do that? No, but it certainly tried. Are the laws of physics binding in the court of law? Yes, through the Engineering Practice Act. These questions and answers took years to figure out. You're just reading the end result. Who was responsible for the bad physics of the yellow light? the licensed professional engineer who signed and sealed the traffic signal timing chart. It's the engineer who is ultimately responsible for getting the math wrong. In Illinois, it's actually a crime, written into the own statutes that it's crime for the engineer to get the math wrong. And if he leaves out any caveats, like the formula only works for these cases, if the engineer leaves those out, it's a crime. And 3 crimes, and you go to jail. There are misdemeanors, you go to jail after the 3rd one. Who is liable for the bad physics of the yellow light? The liability and responsibility are 2 different things. The court is not really interested in the truth as much as it's interested in those who are culpable. Now, I lost the town of Cary case, but I didn't lose because I was wrong. I lose because we went after the wrong people. We should have went after the engineers. The town of Cary was simply doing what the engineers have allowed it to do. So who is liable for the bad physics? The licensed professional engineer. In the very least, he risks his license. The engineer may not be financially liable. His employer may be. Is local government financially liable? Yes. In North Carolina, all local governments are charged with enforcing the Engineering Practice Act. A city, we just found this one out like 3 weeks ago, if that's true. After all these years, the town of Cary can't just be let off the hook because it's actually required to enforce its own Engineering Practice Act, the state's Engineering Practice Act. Also, a city adopting a red light camera ordinance assumes financial responsibility of the red light camera programming, engineering, and all. That's how it works in North Carolina. Is the DOT financially liable? Yes, indirectly. Can the DOT wash its hands from responsibility by invoking sovereign immunity? This was really interesting, the backstory behind this one. A client of mine in Wilmington, I just simply told him to file a small claim of $50 against the traffic engineer who timed his yellow light. Well, that brought out the Attorney General of North Carolina who's going to defend the traffic engineer. And the first defense, we have sovereign immunity. We do no wrong. Sovereign immunity is, the Latin for it means the king can do no wrong. So you can't just say the DOT because it's the king, that you're not allowed to say the king can do no wrong. But what the Attorney General doesn't tell the client is that there's caveats to that, and the NCO DOT gives up its sovereign immunity if it partners with a private firm. And the DMV, part of the DOT, certainly does. By partnering with the red light, it has to partner with the red light camera company because it gives the red light camera companies access to the DMV vehicle license database. So the NCDOT, without the NCDOT's partnership cooperation, there is no red light camera industry, no program. 8, is the Institute of Transportation Engineers liable? In North Carolina, yes. North Carolina holds private organizations liable, and ITE offered its uncertified work to the DOT as a separate organization not licensed to practice engineering. And this is my last slide. And to attorneys that are looking in on this, trying to get a grasp on the scope of the red light camera industry, it looks like a 4-headed hydra. It looks like this. And I'll just read this is Greek mythology. The Hydra dates back. And one of the second labor of Hercules was to kill the Hydra. The problem with the Hydra that makes it so resilient is that if you cut off a head, another one grows back in its place. But if you can cut off the one head called the immortal head, if you cut off that one, then the whole Hydra dies. And then the immortal head doesn't grow back. It's just immortal. And the other heads defend the immortal head. So this applies, I'm applying it to the red light camera industry. So the second of the 12 labors of Hercules was to kill the Hydra. The Hydra had 4 heads. Well, I'm taking creative license here now. The Hydra had 4 heads. 2 of the heads spit red light camera tickets. 1 head sang the praises of the red light camera tickets. 1 head, the yellow one that does not grow back, did not know physics. Without the yellow head, the other heads would not spit and sing. so the other heads defended and concealed the yellow head. Now, ITE is creating the problem, the physics problems which make drivers run red lights. The red light camera firms have the technology to issue tickets to all those who ITE is forcing to run red lights. The red light camera firms use the power of government to enforce a law that opposes the laws of nature, and the government uses all its power to collect the money and to save face. And so if this man here, this driver here, is able to chop the head off the government, like for instance, if you're able to spend years to get rid of the program out of Cary, North Carolina, it just grows back somewhere else. Like in Fayetteville, North Carolina, you chop it off, it grows back somewhere else. Red light camera firms, these things are just simply growing and multiplying. IIHS is the Insurance Institute of Highway Safety. IIHS is a part of the red light camera industry. It makes millions and tens of millions of dollars of profit off of red light camera tickets by raising drivers' insurance rates. IIHS is the lobbying body of automobile insurance companies. You get a red light camera ticket, you're in California and Oregon and Arizona, your premium, your individual premium goes up. If you're in New Orleans, for instance, it's a civil penalty in New Orleans. The individual rates don't go up, but IIHS takes the red light camera effectiveness studies, safety reports, and raises the whole area rates by tens of millions of dollars. And there's all sorts of proof for this, that's what they're up to. Part of IIHS, one of its consortium members is AAA. And so if you have read the news lately, AAA, that the moment, the very week that the North Carolina Board of Engineers publishes that ATS is practicing engineering without a license, and Colorado says Redflex is practicing engineering without a license. The moment all this negative publicity comes out against the red light camera companies, IIHF starts singing the praises of the red light camera firms in government. If IIHS is simply just if you guys want to read some of the most ridiculous reports about red light camera effectiveness studies, read the reports of Wen Hu, who writes these reports, and her predecessor, who wrote reports for IIHS, was Richard Redding. And Richard Redding is the father of the red light camera industry. ITE, IIHS, the red light camera firms, they're all in bed together. There's people that cross over. I know which people these are, but I'm not going to mention them here. And that concludes the presentation.
Thank you so much. We do have a couple of questions. The first, are there any cases where arguments against cameras along these lines have prevailed in a court?
The first time we've got to this point is right now. The case in Greenville, North Carolina is testing this very thing right now. It's taken us years to present the arguments and to get the laws down, but it's happening right now in Greenville. One case just started on these lines in Suffolk County. So that's it. Next question.
All right. Doesn't the use of Zatuni's seal in this manner constitute a violation of the PE Code of Ethics?
Yes, it certainly does. He does this. It does. I don't know. I don't think Zaytouni even knows that ATS is using his seal everywhere. They're just taking his seal, a JPEG of it, and copying it to their templates for all these states. I don't even think Zaytouni is even aware of it. Zaytouni lives in Florida. And so because he lives in Florida, the red light camera installation plans in Florida are most likely legitimate, because in order to open an engineering firm in Florida, you have to have a branch office there, and a branch office has to have a resident engineer that's there. So Zaytouni lives in Orlando. So I think I haven't seen a Florida red light camera plan, but my guess is that those are actually legitimate. Everywhere else, I haven't even seen Zaytouni's. I've seen Zaytouni's seal everywhere, but I haven't seen his signature. Okay.
All right. One more just came in. We'll do this quickly.
Okay.
In Manitoba, the regulator actively works to suppress and ignore complaints. The first step in this is demanding the name of the engineer. Companies and government actively resist efforts to determine the name of engineers responsible. Do other places use such perfectly crooked interpretations of the law?
Oh, yes. It's a big one. Um, uh, yeah, even the Board of Engineers here in North Carolina is aware, and the cities and the red light camera companies have done it to the Board of Engineers here. The Board of these red light camera firms have no respect for any law whatsoever, and they will blot out and they'll give you the red light camera installation plans or the traffic engineering plans, and if they're sealed, they'll blot out the name so that you can't read it. Blotting it out is illegal in North Carolina. You can't blot it out. There's only one case where you can blot it out, and Fayetteville, North Carolina, I asked Fayetteville, North Carolina for its traffic signal plans. They gave me they gave me 5 plans, and each one was blotted out. The seal was blotted out, big black square. And I wrote and saying we don't have to. They said we don't have to give you the name of the engineers on these plans. And then I wrote them back and said the only way you can not give me the name is if these plans are currently in bid, that there's currently bid proposals on what's in these plans. But you guys have already installed these traffic intersections, these signals, give them to me. And they turned around and gave me the unredacted plans. But that did not stop American Traffic Solutions from holding back all the plans from the Board of Engineers but one. But yes, Suffolk County is crazy. They won't, there's no seal, nothing on any of their traffic signal plans or their red light camera installation plans. You don't know who's responsible, and that's part of the fraud which governments try to perpetuate because you can't get to the source of the problem. It puts lawyers and attorneys, plaintiffs, trying to prosecute these things, litigate, on hold for like years, trying to get down to who's responsible. So for the person in Canada, yes, it happens. Like I think so far at the moment, 9 times out of 10, cities will not cooperate.
All right, we were gonna wrap that up right now. If you do have additional questions that we didn't get to, you can email them to exec@penc.org, and I will get them to Brian. Your PDH form and NC Both survey will be emailed out this afternoon. We do have some upcoming PENC events that I want to make you aware of. We have our Charlotte seminar on Tuesday, October 29th, and then we have our large Raleigh seminars December 9th through 11th, where you can get 18 PDHs. Information about both of those is on our website, penc.org. Our next webinar is Wednesday, October 23rd on staged bridge construction. Thank you all so much for attending today, and we will see you next time.
Okay, Katie?